One of the uproars that we have heard in the last few days has regarded the Religious Freedom Act and law that was passed out in Indiana. Religious Freedom Restoration Act is the actual name of it. And we started talking about it yesterday in our last hour. I want to continue with that today because I think there's a lot to it. There are a lot of people who have twisted it around pretty well. There are some people who have raised some very legitimate questions about it. With us this morning is a gentleman who knows a little something about these kinds of laws. He had to help fight these kind of laws in court in the Hobby Lobby case and also the Conestoga Wood case. He is the attorney for the Pennsylvania Family Institute. He is Randy Wenger, who's been with us before. We welcome Randy back. Randy, always good to have you on the show. Good morning.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Randy, you look at this case, man, I'll tell you what, nothing like a buzzsaw out there. Like, we need one every day anyway here in this country to be talking about, and this certainly has become a water cooler topic the last few days. But what do you make of this case? I mean, there are like 20 states, I guess, in the Union, 21 if Arkansas gets theirs through, who want to have these kinds of laws. Why are these kinds of laws important right now? It seems to me that we have the freedom of speech already, the freedom of religion already guaranteed in our Constitution, yet there seems to be a need by a lot of states right now to kind of say, yeah, but let's make sure we know specifically what that means. Is that what's going on here?
Well, I think it is. And part of the issue is that we forget about our freedoms and forget about how important they are. But our freedom to religion is a particularly significant one, and so there's obvious reason why the founders put it as the very first right in the Bill of Rights. Because if government can force us to violate our most deeply held convictions, government can do anything. There's no stopping government. It's a tyrannical government at that point. So I think we all have an interest in making sure that religious liberty is vibrantly protected. Unfortunately, over the last few years, we've seen the government engage in wholesale assaults against those things that have directly affected people's convictions. And that's why I think there's a renewed interest in making sure that every state has those same protections in place that historically have been protected by the United States Constitution.
Randy, I know a lot of people have compared this to the 1993 federal law that was signed by President Clinton and passed by Congress, obviously. But I was reading an article this morning by a guy named Garrett Epps. It brought up two interesting things, and I wanted you to deal with those if you could. The first one was, this guy says they're very different in the Indiana case versus the federal law for this reason. He said, first, the Indiana law explicitly allows any for-profit business to assert a right to the quote-unquote the free exercise of religion. The federal RFRA does not contain such language, and neither does any of the state RFRAs except South Carolina. In fact, Louisiana and Pennsylvania explicitly exclude for-profit businesses from the protection of those RFRAs. Thoughts about that? That's the first part.
Well, that just wants me to scream in anguish. That's what the that's what the whole battle with Hobby Lobby and Conestoga was about. We represented Conestoga Wood Specialties and took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and the federal judges kept saying there is no protection for-profit businesses or for their owners. And we looked back at the text of the Federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and the way that person is defined under federal law. Person includes not just a live individual, but person includes corporations. So whoever was writing that article got it dead wrong, particularly after the United States Supreme Court made it abundantly clear, what was already clear in statute, that RFRA does protect even for-profit corporations. Because if we're not protecting for-profit corporations, and we can just look at corporations as this abstract thing, but anybody who has been involved in a corporation, who owns a corporation, who has a small business, I mean, we're not talking about General Motors or IBM. We're talking about what a lot of Americans earn their living through, a small business.
Right.
And we know that those people who run those businesses stay up at night wondering, how are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to take care of this problem? They're real people running it. They're not these autonomous autonomons. It's a real person who runs these businesses. So the United States Supreme Court said, look, if we want to make sure these real people, these real American citizens have rights, we need to make sure that the corporations that they own don't exclude them from exercising religious liberty.
In other words, you don't drop your rights at your business door. He did say, by the way, just to give you a little bit of faith in this guy, a little bit, he said what these words mean is, first, that he's basically said he understood what you just said, that the Indiana statute explicitly recognizes that a for-profit corporation has free exercise rights matching those of individuals or churches. A lot of legal thinkers thought the idea was outlandish until last year's decision in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby stores, in which the court's 5 conservatives, made sure he said conservatives, interpreted the federal RFRA to give some corporate lawyers a religious veto over their employees' statutory right to contraceptive coverage. He then goes on to say the second point. He said the Indiana statutes explicitly makes a business's free exercise, quote-unquote, right, a defense against a private lawsuit by another person rather than simply against actions brought by the government. Why does this matter? He said, well, there's a lot of evidence that the new wave of religious freedom legislation was impelled, at least in part, by a panic over a New Mexico state court decision, Elaine Photography versus Willock. In that case, a same-sex couple sued a professional photography studio that refused to photograph the couple's wedding. Your thoughts about that second point?
Well, yeah, that is one of the reasons why we're recognizing the need for religious liberty protections, the kind of thing that happened in New Mexico. And if I can add to what the New Mexico Supreme Court said, they said that Elaine Huguenins needed to shoot a same-sex wedding that she disagreed with on philosophical and religious and speech grounds. She needed to shoot it even though it violated her religious conscience, and that was recognized. It violated her religious conscience, but one of the justices of the Supreme Court in New Mexico pointed out, well, sometimes you have to violate your conscience in the way that you run a business, and that's just the price of citizenship.
That's amazing.
And it's breathtaking, because for those of us who really love liberty, and we could stand on either side of the gay and lesbian issue. We could stand on either side of being Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, or nothing at all. And we should see that there's a real problem there. Because if we have government that can tell us, violate your most deeply held convictions and just get along with the program, we have lost the experiment of liberty that this country was founded on.
Well, I was talking to someone yesterday about this. They said, well, why wouldn't you just, in that Elaine Photography versus Willock case, why wouldn't you just go out and lie and say, well, I can't do it that day, I'm going to be away? I said, because it's based on truth and honesty and ethics. And I said, people want to be able to say, listen, I can't do this because it is opposed to my religion. So please get someone else to shoot this. But the idea that you can be forced to go out and shoot this wedding, don't you still retain some kind of control over what you want to do with your business? Now, if someone walks in the door and they're black, and you say, because you're black, I'm not going to wait on you, I'm not going to do that, that's pure discrimination. But if someone walks in the door and is, know anything about them, you're serving them, and then later on they come in and say, by the way, I would like you to do this specific act for me, and that act is opposed to what you believe in, I think that's a whole different story, isn't it?
Well, it absolutely is. And I think a lot of folks in our society have lost the ability to discern what discrimination is. We make choices all the time. Certain choices we've just decided are so evil that we're going to punish them. And so we look back at the experience of African Americans during the Civil Rights era and before that, and what they faced in their inability to get housing, to get jobs, and then the ridiculous things that we were confronted with in seeing blacks not being served at white only lunch counters. That was ridiculous, and you can spend all day trying to come up with an excuse for why they weren't served, and all you can come up with is malice. But somebody like, on the other hand, Baronel Stutzman, who is a flower shop owner in Washington State, She has gay employees. She has a gay customer that she loves, has served for years, considers him her friend. And when he gets married, he wants her to do the flowers for his wedding. She said, if it had to do with my emotions and my desires, I'd do it for him right away. He is my friend. But because of my religious faith, I needed to say no to him. And they hugged. She went away. But later on, she was, and still is, being prosecuted by the Attorney General of the state of Washington. And you have to take a step back from this. And instead of just saying, well, all choices like that are wrong choices. Well, okay, wait a second. What makes a choice right and what makes it wrong? With the African American situation, we are judging people simply on the basis of their skin and treating a whole swath of society with just malice. Where here, I don't think that Baronelle Stutzman has a malicious bone in her body. She just thinks that marriage is a sacred institution, and even though she loves this individual, she doesn't want to do the wedding. As American citizens, shouldn't we be free to make choices like that, and not be told that that somehow that's akin to the malice of racial bigotry?
And yet, in the case of New Mexico, as I read it and I recall it, and again, I'm playing around with a lawyer here, so I got to be careful. But as I recall it, that was a state law, and so they said if you don't go out and photograph this wedding, then you can't practice your business within this state. Wasn't it basically that in the long run?
It was precisely that, and so I think we need to be very careful about the laws that we pass and the effects that they have, because so many of us are thinking, well, sure, we need to have a more decent, loving society where we're treating gays and lesbians with respect, and that is absolutely true. We need to treat everybody in society with absolute respect. I'm a Christian. So,
right.
Of course, I think that we need to treat everybody with respect. That is part of my religious belief. But we've got this real confusion in what it means to treat everybody with respect, to treat people with respect, to love them, to consider them friends, versus to be forced to agree with them in word and in deed. That's not American, to force people to agree, to participate in something, and to further something that they completely disagree with. That's what the Conestoga case was about, where I tried time and time again to explain to folks that, look, regardless of where you stand on the life issue, regardless of whether you believe in abortion or you're religious, you need to respect the right of the Hans to say, facilitating this is contrary to my most deeply held convictions, because if you can force them to violate their convictions, there's no stopping what government can do. And that's the same thing when we're addressing these issues. We need to be really, really careful to see the difference between malicious, hateful bigotry and good people who happen to believe that there's something special about a marriage between a man and a woman.
We're talking with Randy Wenger, who is the attorney for the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Randy, I want to offer a thought here, and I want you to pick it apart a little bit if you'd like. I have a theory that there are many in this country who would like us to have to put that pesky Constitution away. It's become to them a suggestion box. I think our president is probably the biggest one. He's even said from time to time, if it were for the Constitution, I'd be able to do more, which is also a frightening specter for some of us. But if you believe that the Constitution is archaic, as I think many of these people do, they won't say it because it's not the right thing to say, and oh yeah, they got to swear to it from time to time. I then think that the idea of a Judeo-Christian basis to some of that Constitution is therefore also archaic. And so we're supposed to, I believe, as I listen to the arguments, we're supposed to believe that Christianity, the practice of religion, is very archaic, and popular opinion says that you should cave in because of that. You should understand that. And because you believe in religion, or you believe that marriage is only between a man and a woman, somehow you have to give in to that because popular opinion says so. Am I barking up a wrong tree there?
I think you're right on, because a lot of what we've been seeing in this debate and similar debates is sort of that Saul Alinsky style if you don't agree with me, we're going to berate you,
Right.
you, and marginalize you to try to get you to shut up.
And
so
by the way, you'll accept the guilt. And if you accept the guilt, then we've got you. But go ahead.
Well, yeah. I mean, so there's only one way to think and one way to believe, and I don't think they would mind Christianity so much if it was the religious left. But folks who happen to believe differently than they do get in the way, and we need to be careful about that, because what happens when the shoe is on the other foot? What happens if conservatives happen to control the legislatures and happen to control the Supreme Court and happen to control the federal government? I think the liberals are suddenly going to understand that, oh, yeah, hey, liberty was really a good thing. And hey, it's not so good now that the conservatives are trying to force a one-size-fits-all belief system on us as liberals. And they would be entirely right in saying that. So I think we forget so quickly why it was that the federal government passed RFRA in the first place.
Right.
It happened because we had a very badly decided Supreme Court decision that said, oh, yeah, that religion clause that we have in the Constitution, well, it doesn't really protect us against most laws anymore. So the government can come in and tell us what to do. And Congress had an outrage. Both the left and the right realized that this is not good for freedom. So they passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in order to put the same protections to our religious liberty in place that had been in place up until that 1990 court decision called Employment Division versus Smith.
You know what's really interesting, though? You said about the Republicans to get in there, they'd find out how you could really control things. But what's interesting is Republicans, we have found, always act like a minority, and in this particular case, Democrats seem to act like the majority even when they're in the minority. And when you have the press on your side, that's kind of the great equalizer, I think, in the long run. We're going to take a break. We're going to come right back here, Randy. I want to talk more about this whole case and where it's going to go from here. That's a big question. We're talking about the Religious Restoration Freedom Act here on the Gary Sutton Show with Randy Wenger, who's an attorney for the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Back right after this. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show with Randy Wenger. Randy, I made that point, and I know I got a little chuckle from you, but you do have a group in this country that act like the majority, even though they may well be the minority, and they never, ever question their beliefs. And then you have a lot of people in this country who had an idea about what America was, the majority, if we'll call it that, who somehow start to question their beliefs or get hurt by the attacks of those who never question their beliefs. And it seems to me that one of the ideas here is that, we want to corrode the morality of this country. And if we do that, then the country is going to become more easily shaped by this group that never, ever, ever questions what they believe. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's some truth to that, because, quite frankly, those on these far, 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 far left for years have talked about what are the kinds of things that we need to do in order to weaken and to change America, and those things would be consistent with what you're talking about and truth. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the vast majority of Americans here. It's just on some who are trying to change what America is. They're quite happy to use misinformation and fear. And that's precisely what's going on here on the coverage that most people are getting on Indiana's RFRA. You would think, if you just read the general coverage out there, that somehow there's been this massive change that's just occurred that allows people to suddenly be mean and horrible and demonizing to gays and lesbians, and that's not what's going on. What's going on here is we're trying to push back and say, shouldn't there be a place for other Americans too? Shouldn't there be a place for the freedom of conscience? I think we're going to have a hard time, frankly, in getting any more religious freedom restoration acts passed because of the kind of fear that's being struck in the hearts of legislatures when they see how demonized Indiana has become But I don't think that's going to be the end of the story either, because the American people are good people. And I think the interest that we have in fairness that causes us to desire a more tolerant, loving society is one that's going to say, look, I think it's really wrong that Elaine in New Mexico or Baronel Stutzman in Washington State are treated so badly when they're such good people. So I think at the end of the day that the American people will see what's going on and truth will win out. But in the meantime, the left seems to be having its way and only having one view of reality get out there,
right,
and not a very twisted view of reality.
Randy, it is always good talking with you. I really appreciate it. We're going to put this segment up on Facebook.com/910WSBA tomorrow. I look forward to our next time very soon, and you always have a wonderful way of explaining it, kind of like Forrest Gump's mama to me. I understand it a little bit better after I talk to you, Randy.
Hey, it was a pleasure being on. Love talking.
Always a pleasure. Take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Randy.